Today I will be exploring sexuality and happiness with Elizabeth Hendrick, the author of EXODAI, currently living in Tokyo. Hello, Elizabeth, and very welcome to our Open to Happiness podcast.
Hello, Nicoletta. Thank you very much for having me on your podcast today. And I must congratulate you because I see that as of January 2014, you've hit 150 podcasts. And I think that's really wonderful and a great effort to have got that. You've been going for about 4 years now, haven't you?
Close to 3, I would imagine.
Close to 3. Well, congratulations. I'm delighted to be here. And really, it's an honor and a privilege for me to sort of come on your show and talk about some of my experiences.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. You're very kind. Thank you for your nice words. I'm excited as well. I'm looking forward to this chat. Where shall we start? Is it okay if I ask you what is happiness to you?
Yes, that's a good question. It's the heart of the matter, really, isn't it? I think for me, and I've often said in latter years, that happiness is being 100% content with yourself, being who you are, true to yourself, and fully accepting and fully loving yourself. Now, I don't know that everybody gets there, except perhaps the Tibetan monks.
Yeah.
I am so much closer to 100% than I was 15 years ago. But for me, happiness is total contentment and acceptance of who you are and just being at ease and at peace with that.
It sounds fantastic. Very much aligned with me, how I feel about happiness myself. I'm so happy that you shifted somehow your journey in life to the level where you feel almost fully, content with your life and with whom you are as a human being. Can't wait to talk a little bit more about that. Before we get there, how was your relationship with happiness as you moved through life?
Well, that's an interesting question also. I feel that until about the age of 10, I was brought up in a very happy, loving family. My parents were excellent, unconditional love, what every child wants from their parents. And it was a really great family unit with my 2 brothers as well. I'm the youngest of 3. And everything was a sort of childhood bliss. Now, when we're a child, we're still learning. We haven't been confronted with what does happiness mean? What does soul mean? What's your spiritual journey? And I was just living in blissful happiness, I would call it. And the problems for me started to arise when I hit puberty. And this was when I realized that I had feelings for other girls in my class. And I had known from a very young age. It had even developed from the age of 4. I used to chase girls at play school. And I didn't think anything of it until I hit puberty and it became an issue in my class. And once that issue started to sort of demonize me and make me feel that there was something wrong with me, I had a problem, I think my happiness started to wane. And I think there's all sorts of other issues. I mean, basically, we're born into abundance. When we're born, we are 100% happy. And then for the next 7 years, we're like a sponge and we soak up everything around us that people tell us. We're so impressionable and we don't have any filters. So I think it's, if anybody gets from abundance 100% at the age of 0 to 100% abundance at the age of 7, I'd be very surprised because there are so many outside influences that are affecting you and influencing you. And even up until the age of about 15, we're still very impressionable. And it's only as we start to come into adulthood that we actually put some filters in and start to verify what people are telling me. But in my case, in my adolescence, age 12, 13, these messages had already come to me and deeply impregnated my psyche, so that I started to be uncomfortable with myself. And frankly speaking, Nicoletta, this went on through my adult life. When I was about 27, I sat down with a priest and put myself forward and said, look, is it okay to be gay before God? And fortunately, he was a very liberal priest and told me, yes, it's okay. God is the potter, you are the clay. But I only accepted myself consciously at that point. Subconsciously, I was still hardwired to self-sabotage my life in relationships in particular. And it started to affect my business as well. But basically, I was attracting dysfunctional relationships, relationships that weren't going to work out. I was self-sabotaging myself to fall in love with women that were not accessible to me, straight women, basically, or gay women who were already taken. And so this just went on in adult life, and I was in complete denial. So my relationship with happiness through this time was I was very miserable about my sexuality, but I kept blaming the external. And I wouldn't, so a few friends in my 20s said, maybe you should see a therapist. No, there's nothing wrong with me. So it was this denial that meant that I stuck with this misery, and I stuck with it, and I didn't start seeking until I was about 35. 36, 37, and I went on to a reality TV show, and let's just say I had the earthquake experience, the traumatic experience in my life that properly sent me to rock bottom, where I'd been many times before, but properly in the deep absolute zero of rock bottom. And there I assessed the situation and had a revelation over a 2 or 3 month period, reading a very good book, actually, you might have heard of. It's called The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck. Fantastic book about love and grace and faith. And through reading that and through some respite and rehabilitation in the south of France, as it happened, I managed to realize that I did not accept my sexuality. And at that point, I realized why I'm not happy. I wasn't at one with myself. And so from that point to age about 37, I began the journey of seeking. It's a journey that many of us take because we go through a life-changing trauma. And it's a journey that many of us don't take, and we never explore because life seems to be fine. But I'm really glad that I've had those traumas and I've had those difficulties that has turned me into a seeker. And I've been seeking to heal since that point, and made a lot of headway in learning to love myself as a lesbian woman in a 7-year period, which a lot of my book, EXODAI, which I'll just hold up for you here, this is my book. It's a memoir, and it talks very much about my sexuality and what I've just described about my relationship with happiness. And it goes into those 7 years of healing, which ended in a very tortuous, mentally and physically torturous relationship with a Japanese dominatrix. And through that, I came out the other side learning to love myself. I'm still not 100% there, but I've made so much groundway. I think I'm probably at the 80, 85, 90% mark of total self-loving. Perhaps that's an exaggeration, but anyway, that's a long answer to your question, my relationship with happiness through the years.
Thank you so much. It's not a long answer, it's actually appropriate. We struggle to fit in just a few sentences a life story, and it's impossible, isn't it? There's a lot to say in there. It's your joy and pain combined together, alternating, bringing you from the highest feeling of satisfaction and enjoyment to the brink of despair, like it happens often in life.
Right.
But thank you so much for sharing how difficult it's been for you to actually accept yourself, accept who you are and how you are and what you want and what your needs are. Because from what you describe, you've been miserable a long time because you didn't fit into what the society told us we should be, told you, the society programmed you to be a particular way. But obviously that wasn't aligned with who you were. And it's actually amazing that you didn't just obey with the crowd and the status quo. And although minority, you stood up for yourself and you chose to be who you want to be. The question is now, why do we are in the 21st century still challenged in expressing our sexuality? Why so many people still struggle to come out to own themselves, they hide all the time, they live in a secret life, and they feel guilty and shameful about it. They feel a little bit isolated, belonging to just very small communities. And having that feeling, which I sometimes see in my work with clients, that feeling that they are not embraced, that they are not accepted, that they are not okay, they are not right, they are not like all of the others. Why?
Mm.
In this time and age, we still struggle to accept people the way they are.
Well, I think one of the things I'd look at is different cultures and different religions. Particularly, you look at, I mean, I consider myself a European, and I think Europeans are quite progressive and secular. So they've broken away from religion in a way that they haven't yet in America. Religion is still tied into politics, unfortunately. So social issues become part of the state's decision, whereas issues like homosexuality and abortion are separate. Well, they're not. We don't go into that place. Certainly not in the UK. We don't make it a choice of the government. But I think you look at Islam, you look at Christianity, and some of the more traditional religions that people are coming from. In the Bible and in the Quran, homosexuality is abhorred by God. If you read it within a certain context. I mean, so is wearing mixed fabrics in my clothing, and so is eating prawns and shellfish. And a woman who commits adultery in the Bible should be stoned. I mean, we've grown on from that, but there are certain, like, it's sort of like evolutionary traits that we still haven't grown out of. And I think it's largely generated by fear. People don't understand it. And in the 21st century, I think Europe has come a long way. It's interesting in cultures where there isn't really a religion. I think there's much more acceptance. The subjects are often still taboo and not talked about, but nobody has a strong view. This is abhorrent with God, whereas that's very much there in the evangelical right-wing culture, and obviously in Muslim countries as well, particularly Saudi Arabia. Of course, it all exists, but it absolutely has to go on behind closed doors. Otherwise, you're in trouble. So I think it's just the world, the Earth. Sorry, not the Earth. Humans are just still clinging to religion as a form of protection to address the fear they have of things they don't understand. And I think it's really, really sad. I mean, one of my missions in life is to take away this myth that being gay is an abomination before God. It's a religious myth that is being perpetuated over generation from generation, and I think it's very sad. But we've still got such a long way to come, and really, I'm glad to be part of that progressive movement, if you will.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's a beautiful purpose to have, especially that it's inspired by your own experience.
Right.
You lived it, so you know it inside out. You know the pain, and you know the joy of feeding yourself, and you know the pain of feeling rejected, or fearing yourself that you might be rejected, that you might be judged, that you might be ostracized or marginalized, or put labels on you, and so on. That's important. And thank you so much for actually setting the context. Where are we at the moment? How much religion actually influenced and shaped our mentality and the way we see life, even to this day, even in the West, beyond the Eastern, obviously, world and traditions. That's true. You mentioned earlier on, Elizabeth, the experience with the dominatrix. Maybe we can move a little bit the conversation in here, in understanding sexuality beyond being gay or being heterosexual or being pansexual or whatever. There's such a fluid way of looking at sexuality now, and there is more acceptance towards this fluidity. People that maybe still explore, people that are still willing to figure out where they fit in different stages of their lives, and give themselves the permission to actually to actually seek within and choose what is right for them. But if we move a little bit beyond what we would consider a sort of a normal sexuality, or more known sexuality, or more accepted sexuality, we had this movie, the 50 Shades of Grey, which was very successful, with two different movies over the years. I have sensed in my own practice that it changed a little bit how we look at our intimacy, how we look at our sexual activity, the connection that we have. And I had a good number of women coming into the therapy space and feeling a little bit uncomfortable with the requests that our partners would suddenly make after watching that movie. I think most people would think that what we see in the 50 Shades of Grey is BDSM. I have also worked with clients that told me that for them, 50 Shades of Grey is kind of vanilla. They want more, they would desire more, they would do more. So I don't know exactly, everyone is probably a spectrum there, a continuum of experience, with everyone choosing what they want to do. But yet, if we carry on from the point we discussed earlier on about stigma and misconceptions and misconstrued realities, what is really BDSM, and why is the society still struggling to accept it as part of the norm? Let's put it this way.
Right. One thing I would say about 50 Shades of Grey is that it went in, it really just, certainly the first movie in the first book, it just tipped its toe in the water. There was a bit of tying up with ties and a few humiliating situations for the protagonist of the book, but it really was not even, couldn't even shake a stick at the kind of hardcore nature of the kind of relationships that I was getting into. So it's quite interesting because a lot of people thought 50 Shades of Grey was quite shocking, and if that's a sort of a 1 out of 10, then mine is a 12 out of 10. But in terms of the stigma, again, I think it's a lack of not a lack of understanding. It's just people don't understand it. Now, in my case, again, I knew from a young age that I liked certain aspects of BDSM. I had no idea what it was. It turns out I liked bondage, and I used to have fantasies as a child. And when I was 10 years old, I would have these fantasies. Mum would put out the light, I would go to bed, and I wouldn't fall asleep straight away. I would have some fantasies, and then I'd think, oh, I need the toilet. Then I'd get up, I'd go to the bathroom. There's nothing to do. Why? Because I don't need a pee. What's happening? I was starting to get turned on. I had no idea what was happening. And it wasn't until about 5 years later when I joined the dots and I realized, that's what was happening. So I knew that I was into some fairly kinky things from a very young age. I couldn't define them or put a name on it. I just thought I was very peculiar, and that was fine. But I kept all of that a big secret. And I didn't sort of come out, as it were, as a submissive into BDSM until my adult life. And interestingly, there's an interesting contrast here. As a lesbian, I was openly gay. I was never in the closet. From the age of 10, I told the first girl, it was the first time I told a girl that I loved her. And the age 13, I identified I was a lesbian. Everybody knew in my class. And suddenly when puberty hit, everyone says, you've got a problem. You should be a woman now, loving men. There's something wrong with you. And so I felt a lot of shame there. BDSM, I was an adult when I started experimenting properly and exploring and going into the scene. So not only was I an adult and therefore filtering the information, the feedback from a mature adult perspective, but also the people around me were adults. So they had adult reactions to what I was doing and what I was getting up to. So I never actually, for me, I never had any embarrassment about being a submissive, whereas I was that went into the psyche and basically made all this self-loathing, self-sabotaging guilt and shame. That was based on my sexuality as a lesbian woman. But the BDSM for me, it was innate, and I never would have explored in BDSM if I didn't have that innate interest. And I think the vast majority of people don't actually have such alternative fetish interests. And so I think it is a small group of people. And I've often wondered, I mean, I heard one theory, it is innate, and it comes from the birthing process. And some people like pain because they've downloaded the pain of the mother giving birth.
Very interesting.
And so when they experience pain, they get this kind of euphoria, because when we're born into the world, that's the most euphoric moment of our human life. When we take that first breath, and that whole experience, it's such a euphoric, abundant happiness, joy moment. And if at the same time we're downloading the pain of our mother into our psyche, then in our adult lives, this is a theory that I've heard, and I'm not saying it's wrong or right, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And that could be one explanation for why some people really love and get turned on by pain. My case was bondage. Now, I was born about 10 days late, and apparently on my due date, I started to come out and then stopped and said, wait, I'm going to stay a bit longer. Now, I wonder to myself, maybe I was in the womb, half out, in a very restricted position. Maybe the feeling of restriction, that's why I love it so much, because it takes me back on a cellular level to that joyous time of my life when I was birthed. And there's this same theory about golden rain, which is that again, the mother urinates as she's giving birth to the baby, and so the baby in his adult life loves golden rain. It's a theory. It's absolutely makes sense to me. I don't know how much proof there is scientifically, but I have heard it said that this could be coming from the birthing experience. Also, babies are affected who come out through cesarean. I mean, I was induced eventually because I wasn't going to come out, so they induced me. I mean, how this all affects the growth of the baby in the brain, which is already highly developed at that point of birth. So I think it's innate for most people who explore BDSM, whether it's domination, submission, whether they like rope bondage, whether they like rubber bondage, whether they like being whipped, sadomasochism, whatever it is that they like. And in my case, it was sort of one vertical in particular. It seems to be that is innate, and people are seeking it out because they've had fantasies about it from their childhood. But I think it's a small section of society, and those who have no inclination whatsoever except for vanilla sex and, sort of the barrier, there's a bandwidth within there, you can experiment and explore a little bit, but nothing kinky. They are fearful. They don't understand it. Meanwhile, you do have, I suppose, I would say, people who are really, really very highly sexed and really very much into all kinds of sex and experimentation. And although it's not innate, they will go and explore BDSM. And I think that it's the very sordid side, the over exploration, sex for sex sake, and where it turns into porn, where people are all just getting into orgies, whatever, and in a non-spiritual way, in a non-natural way. I think that's where the stigma is coming from, because I do think people push the boundaries of sex and BDSM. And in BDSM, if you are actually enduring a lot of pain, whether you're being whipped or whatever it is, rope suspension can be very torturous. If you are in a lot of pain, you eventually, as the pain increases and you endure it, your brain will start to emit endorphins. And that happens whether you're into BDSM or not. Your brain will start to emit endorphins, and this will put you into a bit of a trance-like state. Some people call it subspace. I used to just feel incredibly ecstatic and euphoric. And there's where you start to get people addicted. Myself included, I was addicted to torture for a period. But I didn't actually like pain. It didn't turn me on. But I was experiencing this euphoria from getting over that threshold. So anybody who's not naturally into BDSM, who experiments with it, they're going to find some really interesting stuff. So why is there so much stigma attached? I think it's just people just don't understand it. It's so unknown. It's so taboo. And people are fearful of what they don't understand.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's very coherent. And it leads to another 10 questions, but we'll take it slowly.
Of course.
Before we move from here, coming back to my clients, women that are not really into being submissive and feeling dominated by their partners, so irrespective of the nature of the sexuality, people that really don't feel comfortable with the sudden need of their partners. Can one practice BDSM and the other one not? Can that relationship work? How do you see it?
It's quite tricky actually. You've kind of got to both be into it, because if the person who is dominating, let's say the submissive is into it, let's say the submissive wants to be whipped, and your partner plays the dominant, if they're not into it, they're just not going to whip the submissive in a satisfying way. It just, the chemistry just can't work. It's very rare. I mean, my first girlfriend at university, I tried to get her to tie me up, but it just doesn't work if they're not into it, because they're not enjoying it with you. And when I started to practice BDSM with like-minded partners, I mean, it was amazing. It was euphoric because we were both so into what we were doing, although they were playing the role of domination and I was the submissive. We understood each other. We were on the same page. So I think if your clients, some of your female clients are finding that their husband or partner, or female partner, male partner, let me just say partner, if their partner wants to practice BDSM on them and they're very uncomfortable with it, I think they need to tell their partner it's not for them. And if that means the partner goes in a different direction, well, then, so be it. I think sexual harmony or sexual, what's the word I'm looking for? To meet sexually in relationships, it becomes less and less important as you get older. And what becomes more important is companionship and love. And but certainly in your 20s and your 30s and even your 40s, I think the sexual component, the sexual meeting of minds sexually is very important. So if they're not into it, you can't pretend to be into it. You definitely experiment, because you might find that something titillates you. And I always say try everything once, but if it doesn't, it doesn't, and that's it. Thank you, no more. This doesn't work for me. I think they need to be honest with themselves. They've got to be true to themselves, and they mustn't bend their personality and their being to fulfill someone else, because then you're in a codependent relationship, and it's not the right relationship for you.
Yes, that's true. And it's so difficult when partners love each other, when they have a family, maybe they have a mortgage on the house, they have children. It's hard to stay together because one remains unfulfilled, the other one doesn't feel interested in what's developing into the partner's sexuality right now. And it's also difficult to break up. So it's kind of a little bit of a dilemma. I see it sometimes.
Yeah, it's not out of the question. So in Japan, it's very common for a man, a married man, and he's put completely in the family unit and will never divorce his wife, but it's quite common for a man to go and pay a dominatrix to fulfill that side of him. And I think that's perfectly acceptable. It's purely the BDSM component, and they have a great connection, but that's it. And if his wife can't share that, he goes and looks for it somewhere else so that so the relationship is not frustrated. And I think it's very hard, but if your female clients were to let their partner go and pay for a dominatrix or a master to deal the goods, because if you're paying somebody for that, it's typically not sexual. If you're paying a dominatrix, they're just going to do things to you. But there's no kissing on the lips. Typically there wouldn't be any intercourse if it's a paid for dominatrix. Certainly I'd hope not. It maybe they can come to an arrangement. It's hard for people because there's always a jealousy factor and there's human emotions involved. But if it's the one thing that is putting pressure on the relationship that they don't see eye to eye, one of them wants to do BDSM, the other doesn't, allow them, just be a little bit open in the relationship and allow them to go and fulfill that in another neck of the woods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, there are solutions, and people can find their own way, really, what works for them. I'm not sure how open would people in Europe be around this.
Yeah, it's easier said than done, isn't it?
Yes, it is indeed.
Yeah.
Coming back to you now and your own experience, share that you engaged in some shocking and extreme activities in the past. You mentioned the relationship with the dominatrix yourself. You spoke about becoming dependent, really, in that relationship, being codependent, but also finding something special, something necessary for you. If you want to share a little bit about that, why was that necessary for you? And can these extreme BDSM practices, whatever they are, I don't know what is extreme, probably everyone has their own standard, but can they become life-threatening?
They definitely can become life-threatening. There's no doubt about that. I mean, in the beginning of this conversation, I talked about how it wasn't until I went on this reality TV show that I accepted that there was a problem. I didn't accept myself as a lesbian woman. And I think it was Woody Allen who said that 50% of success is showing up. 50% of a solution to the problem is acknowledging that there's a problem. So I acknowledged that there was a problem back in 2007 and then went on this 7-year journey to resolve that. And the last 2 years of that 7-year journey was what I call my boot camp experience, which was my S&M relationship with a mistress called Tomo. And half of the book, my book EXODAI, half is about this far through is chapter 14 onwards is the story of Tomo. That's obviously a pseudonym, but this very real Japanese dominatrix I had a relationship with, and she was very sadistic, and I was very hardcore. And what was interesting was that I didn't actually like pain, and the things she did to me in the relationship were not really the bondage things that I wanted. She properly dominated me mentally, physically, psychologically. And it turned out she was probably a bit of a narcissist, and didn't give me any space for emotions, and constantly felt she was entitled, not just from me, but from everybody. The extreme things that we went into, well, in that 2-year period, we had some play sessions, and would you believe it, in Japan, as you know, they have a lot of love hotels. They also have 1 or 2 S&M themed love hotels. And there was one that was very close to where I lived. I could walk there in 10 minutes from where I lived in Tokyo back in, the relationship went from 2012 to 2014. And I mean, it was very hardcore. So she would suspend me from the ceiling with rope, and whip me. And I mean, I don't know how much this is 18 plus video. I don't know, for putting it on YouTube, I don't know how much I can say, but let's just say it was incredibly torture, some electric torture, whipping, in particular whipping, really, like she was lashing the whip down on me like Martina Navratilova delivering a serve. And I would often come out of these sessions covered in bruises and, you know, a couple of cuts shy of a hospital. So but for me, what was actually happening is that she enjoyed seeing me suffer. And she derived great pleasure out of me suffering and struggling for her. And she knew, she was excited, because if I was a masochist, a full-on masochist, then I wanted the pain, but I wasn't. I was a submissive. And she didn't really like playing with masochists because they were there for them. They weren't there for her. Whereas submissives like me, she enjoyed playing with because I was taking all the pain to serve her because she enjoyed my pain. And it was this dynamic that was symptomatic of the fact that I believed I should be punished, because deep down in my hardwired psyche, I was disgusted with myself, and I thought there was things wrong with me, and it was still part of the healing process. So, I mean, I don't recommend BDSM as a method of therapy, but in my case, it became a kind of therapy where we absolutely went full frontal into all of that pain and guilt and shame, and gave it everything it deserved until it sort of, I came out the other side and realized that all I wanted was recognition, and I should, instead of going to this sadistic dominatrix who was bully of all bullies, the last person who would give me any recognition, I needed to find that recognition in myself. And so I came all the way out the other side. I sort of ricocheted between genius and sanity, went through the void. Someone once said to me, "What happens if you stare into the abyss of the void?" And he said, "It stares back at you." I mean, I was there, and I sort of came out the other side. Now, one of the things about my book is that this relationship I had with this Japanese dominatrix was a codependent relationship. So, as you will know, in a codependent relationship, you're needing each other more than you're loving each other. And the aim is to get into an interdependent relationship, which I have now with my current girlfriend. But if you're in a codependent relationship, there's you're pressing each other's buttons, and typically it's in a negative way. But so when you're in a codependent relationship, you have every opportunity for your spiritual journey to go backwards, but you have every opportunity with the right approach for your spiritual journey to go forwards as well. And the right approach is loving and forgiving every situation. Love and forgive every situation. And by doing this, because my faith at this point was very, very strong, I was a very strong Christian at this time. But I had become very liberal. I had sort of thrown away a lot of this dated thinking about homosexuality. It was still hardwired in my subconscious, but consciously I was very much okay with my sexuality and what I was doing in the BDSM. And I was even using BDSM to get spiritual commune with God, and say the prayers of the church. I mean, that's something else I talk about in my book. So there's a very spiritual side to it. But basically, I was applying love and forgiveness throughout this relationship. So when she did something that just threw me into a total spasm, and lot of mental torture. The physical torture I could cope with on the whole. The mental torture was what really drove me to the ground, to the absolute zero. But I kept coming back. My response was love and forgiveness, love and forgiveness. So in the end of it all, I kind of came out on top and sort of triumphed. And all of the love that I had poured into the situation somehow meant that I grew and I came out loving myself. And I relate it back to sort of God in me and God, the omnipotent love, consciousness, and light just reflected back to me what I was giving. So it was a really, really beautiful outcome. And the book goes to this point of redemption. But half of the book is very much that 2-year relationship with Tomo, the Japanese dominatrix.
Wow. It's so fascinating to hear you talking about your experience with BDSM, with your sexuality, as being a vehicle towards spiritual awakening, towards self-discovery, towards healing, towards personal growth, essentially, what you're describing. And we're going to go to that self-love in a moment. I'd like you to maybe share and explain a little bit how did you realize that these BDSM practices at an unconscious level suggested that you didn't feel deserving of love or of validation, and you deserved actually to be punished? And what could have created that belief in you at a subliminal level?
It was a position of self-awareness after the event. At the time, I couldn't have told you so clearly that I am practicing this BDSM because I have a lack of self-love. In fact, something very delusional was going on instead. As humans, if we have this disconnect, this internal disconnect, whatever it is, and in my case, it was a lack of self-love. I loved myself as a friend, as a family member, as an office colleague. I didn't love myself as a lesbian woman. This disconnect over my sexuality was manifesting itself in adult life by self-sabotaging me. So putting me in stupid situations, relationships that were toxic, dysfunctional. And at the time, I wasn't present and aware that that's what was happening. But what happens is that BDSM had just made the perfect framework for me to get the punishment that I felt I deserved at a psychological, cellular level. And I drew that into me. But it was my self-sabotaging subconscious that deluded me to think that I should stay in this relationship. And I deceived myself into thinking that I was on a mission to save this woman from her demons, and that one day we would have this amazing session where I effectively exorcised as an exorcism.
Yes.
And brought out her demon. And in one of the last scenes of the book, I go to a session with her. And I've painted a red cross on my chest because I think I've taken some holy water. I've stolen some holy water from the church because I think I'm going into a session with her to exorcise her demons. And it's this delusion that was bound up in my faith and my love, and I thought I was on this mission to save her. And we can't save other people. We can only save ourselves. We might help people and give them signposts, but the only person who can save that person is themselves. And I had deluded myself, which meant I couldn't get out of this relationship because I convinced myself it was my mission to save her. And I had to take all this torture and all this pain and take it away from her so that I could save her. And that was a very noble pursuit. And the love that I put into it was amazing. But I was on a wrong course because I was deluding myself to stay chained to this relationship. And the self-awareness all comes after the relationship finishes, and in some ways, writing the book was part of the cathartic process, but there was a period of about 6 months after the relationship finished, and I ended it with her because I finally came to the realization that I had to get out of the relationship. But in the last 6 months of the relationship with her, I was starting to see and starting to get messages that I needed to recognize myself and I needed to learn to love myself. And there were some therapists I was talking to, and I was getting ideas from church. And this gradual process of starting to love myself started to happen during the last 6 months of the relationship. And it was as if God had to strip me down from everything. I had my financial stability, my freedom, my self-esteem, all of it was stripped away. And I was at this really dark place. And I had to lift myself up by my own bootstraps. And I did start to manage doing that. And eventually I saw the light and realized I had to finish the relationship. And I left her. It took me the best part of 2 years to get over her after splitting up with her. It took her about a month, perhaps less. But during that time, I had some amazing dreams. Again, there's one of these dreams I describe in the book, where I'm looking in the mirror, saying to myself, Elizabeth, I love you. I love everything you stand for. Elizabeth, I love you. I love everything about you. I love everything you stand for. And this face peeled off me. And then I saw the real inner child, which incidentally looked like a surfer. But that was, and I was seeing myself, and in that dream was symbolic of the change I was going through. So it was very much being forced to reckon with the dark place that I was in and find my own strength to bring myself out of it. And again, I think it was part of the love that I'd put into every situation that I was confronted with, but that came back to me. So that's sort of, but it took a while to get to that point where I could say this is what was happening in that relationship. I couldn't see it when I was in the thick of it, but I could see it looking back on it retrospectively very clearly.
So interesting. Would you say that the love you felt for Tomo was a delusion itself? How would you look back at that now?
No, I still love her in a part of me. The love I had for her, I don't think it was real love, unconditional love. Well, I think unconditional love is kind of reserved for parents to children, really. It's very difficult to do horizontal unconditional love, but I know I did love her, but it was more an infatuation kind of love. It was more an emotional love, and the love that I have for my current partner is completely different. Things really changed after that relationship because I noticed that I wasn't drawing in, I wasn't becoming attracted to the same kind of girls who would always lead me on, and in fact they were straight, and it just stopped. All of that stopped happening, and I stopped getting emotional. In my relationship, during my book, I talk about this. I did actually a past life regression, and I just kept an open mind. I don't know what I think about past life regressions, but I just keep an open mind. But I went with a Japanese bilingual life regression therapist, and she took me back to a time, medieval time, and I was in Eastern Europe, and I was lighting the pyre under the stakes of witches who were being burned, and that was my job, and I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed watching the witches burn, and that was a past life regression. And whether or not you want to believe it, something that happened that was for real was that in reliving that experience, sort of in a slightly hypnotic state, I released so much buried emotion from my soul and spirit. It was an incredibly relieving process. And I think that actually peeled away a lot of the issues that I had I'd had along because of my sexuality. I'd built up all this emotion and hurt. And whether or not it was a cellular memory from a past life, or whether it was built up in this current life, I shed a huge amount of that after doing this regression therapy. And it was from that point that things really started to change. So I think that the relationship helped me get to a point where I would seek to resolve myself. But certainly
Yeah.
in the last 6 months of that relationship, I started to really love myself and see the light.
So beautiful. I see it like a return back to the self, like a reconnection with the self.
Mm.
After loving another and expecting the other to show up, to be there for you, to treat you in a way or another, to validate you and whatever. And you also mentioned that by learning to love yourself, it
Mm.
put an end to the sadomasochistic tendencies or practices. Do you really feel there is a connection between these two? Because I'm thinking that may be an universal truth. So other people that struggle
Right.
with
Yeah.
themselves might find a bit of soothing in that.
So in my case, and this is so BDSM is multifaceted, and everybody who is practicing BDSM have their own very unique story and unique fetishes and interests. In my case, I don't want to be whipped. I don't want that pain anymore. I wouldn't go back there. Sure, I'd love to be tied up, but that's because bondage turns me on, and I need it much less these days. But I'm 52 now, so I've moved on. The other things are more important in my life. But I absolutely have no interest and no attraction to going back to a mentally or physically torturous relationship, albeit consensual. I just don't want to go there because I never liked pain. I entered into it to please her because that was my quintessential expression of love, this love and this infatuation I was talking about earlier. Whereas now the way I love is totally different. It's much more a companionship love. You just want them to be happy. Whereas that wasn't where I was with Tomo.
Yeah,
And so is it a universal truth? No, I don't think it is, because for me, getting out of a sadistic, sadomasochistic relationship was because I didn't need to be whipped anymore, because I don't feel that guilt anymore. But if somebody is in a sadomasochistic relationship, it could be psychologically that they feel they should be punished. And it probably is many practitioners of BDSM probably have some internal issues that they're playing out on the surface through BDSM, and it provides a perfect framework for that. But there's a huge number of people who are practicing sadomasochism because that is what turns them on. And it's the pain that turns them on, and it's an incredible, deep sexual interaction with their partner. And they love themselves very much, but they're just turned
really.
on by pain. Yeah,
Okay.
they're just turned on.
Okay.
Sorry, my mic went up.
Yeah,
So they love themselves very much, and they're just turned on
by
by
pain.
pain, and
So
they don't need to leave that relationship.
I get it. So how would people know whereabouts they fall, in what category? How do they know if they actually do it because they want to punish themselves unconsciously, or they do it because this is them, this is how they feel excited with being in a sexual act or whatever happens there? How would people know from your experience?
I didn't know. I didn't know until things got ridiculous, and I had to start scratching my head and started talking to therapists. So
You have made it
I,
with therapists? Sorry for this, uh, to intervene. Would you have
sorry,
made Would you
what
have
was your question?
realized whatever you realized about yourself and your tendencies without the support of therapy? Would you have realize that on your own, or you needed support from outside to help you go inside and within yourself and find out those truths?
It's hard to say. I think the therapists really helped me. Would I have made those observations on my own? I'm not sure that I would.
Mhm.
I think I had one therapist who just said to me one day, you've got to find that recognition in yourself. You had to find the recognition in yourself. Stop relying on it. Stop relying on Tomo to give you recognition, because she won't. You've got to find it in yourself. And I think so. It wasn't just therapy. I mean, I was reading books. And one day I was sitting down watching watching a video on the internet that just happened to come up, and it was a I can't remember the name. It was an American anchor, and a lady who'd had problems with obesity, and she had been berated and abused and trolled because of her body weight. And she was on this video just saying to all of you out there who are feeling bad because of your color, your shape, your size, your sexuality, your gender, whatever it is, don't let anybody else tell you that there's anything wrong with you, and words along that lines. And I just
Yeah.
watched this video that just popped up on my YouTube channel one day, on YouTube one day,
What did you feel
and
when you
and I
heard
burst into tears. I burst into tears. I thought,
spoke
this
to
is it.
you? It felt
It
like it
spoke
spoke
to
to
me.
you.
It was just this. This was exactly what I
Yeah.
needed to hear at that
Yeah.
moment. And so I think this happens to all of us. When we're open, when we're seeking, when we're trying to understand what's going on, uh, you read things, you see things, you hear things. I mean, I was still going to church in those days. The stuff was coming to me in the sermons. My friends were, so your friends become your psychotherapist. So could I have made it without the therapist? I think I saw three different therapists during that time. One was in Japan, one was in Dubai, one was in London, and it just depended on where I was. Um, could I have managed without them? Probably. It might have taken a bit longer. I think they were tremendous help in
Yeah.
helping steer me in the right direction.
Yes.
So yeah, but you have to be open to it. You've got to say, okay, there's a problem. I need to solve this problem, and you have to be open to that. And sometimes we find a problem. We say, okay, I know there's a problem, but I'm just going to put it on the shelf because I can't do anything about it now, and that's fine. And then when the time is ready, you'll get it off the shelf and say, okay, now I'm going to go and talk to somebody about this. So I think therapy can be tremendously helpful, but you have to find the right therapists. I've always been very lucky in finding the right therapist. I have had a couple of duds, but on the whole,
Yes.
I've been very, very blessed in getting in front of the right people.
Yeah. So you're choosing, in a way, you're choosing and you're opening to finding who you really need at that particular
True.
time. So your life and your experience has been um, very unique and very,
Mm.
very special, quite rich. Um, you moved through a very challenging experience within your sexuality over the years, from different stages, from the early years of life when you're discovering what turns you on or who do you want to play with, wanting to be tied at 10 and so on, continuing with relationships up until the moment when you realize in that relationship with Tomo, what was the dynamic about? What is this actually, more than the act of whatever we do here? What is happening with us? I wonder why you decided to write the book, the memoir book, EXODAI, and what is its core message? What do you want to tell people that might be interested in learning about this?
Thank you. It's a great question. So why did I decide to write the book? All through my life, I've kept diaries. I used to pencil write diaries, and then probably for the last 15 years, I've typed diaries into the computer, whatever was going on in my life. I typed a big diary about the reality TV show when I was on that. Um, I typed a diary and sort of turned it into a book about my first startup entrepreneur experience back in 2005. And writing the diary, I was in a very stressful situation back then, and writing the diary was my therapy, my day-to-day therapy, because stuff would happen in the office and it was all out of control, and I was super stressed. And I'd go and write this diary, which had a cathartic effect on me. And when I finished, that was a film magazine I tried to launch back in 2004. When that whole episode finished, and that was also a 2-year period, I turned the diary into a book. I never published it, but I had a few friends read it. And I've always been a writer, and it turns out this was the story. This relationship with Tomo turned out to be the story that I would publish. Originally, it was just going to be the story of Tomo, but it went through various sea changes, and eventually it became the whole story of my sexuality, from why I didn't love myself, that's starting to through the relationships and ending with how I learned to love myself. But why did I actually decide to write it? A thing happened when I was in 2012. I was still living in Dubai. I lived in Dubai for 5 years. And in 2012, I had met Tomo because I had visited Tokyo a couple of times, and our relationship had started, and I knew we were having a relationship, and I was trying to move back to Tokyo, probably 60% because of her, 40% because I wanted to move back to the Far East anyway. And during that time, I was really putting it out there to God and the universe. What is my purpose? What is my purpose? I even went to the Holy Land, obviously very close to Dubai, so really convenient. I went on a 10-day trip to the Holy Land with my church, with a very, very spiritual group of people. And I spent virtually every day in different churches praying to God to reveal my purpose. And during that year, 2012, 3 things happened. One is I inherited some money so that I could relocate to Tokyo. 2, I was actually, when I was contemplating walking across the beach in Dubai, should I move back to Tokyo or should I go somewhere like Hong Kong or Singapore? I was definitely going to go back to the Far East. And I was walking along the beach shore, and somebody had written Tokyo in the sand, and I just stumbled across the word Tokyo written in shells. Why anybody would write Tokyo on a beach in Dubai? Anyway, it was a sort of massive flurry from the angels telling me where I should go. But the third thing, which is really the motivation for the book, was that in, I think, November or December of 2012, I used to read the Bible maybe once or twice a week, and I would have a little homily handbook alongside. And on this particular occasion, I just read the Bible, and again, I was very open. What is my mission? What should I be doing? And the Bible passage, I think it was the story of Joshua, who gets swallowed by the whale. And anyway, somebody in the Bible, a character in the Bible who went through immense suffering. And then this homily talks about why we sometimes have to go through suffering, meaning in the biblical character's case, it was so that he could go and help people by talking about his suffering. And maybe you will go through a lot of suffering so that you can write and tell people and help people by relating your story. And it was like, that's your mission.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, yeah, I mean, it was just, gosh. And I knew that it was talking about my relationship with Tomo, and that I was going to go through a lot of suffering, but that I would come out the other side, and that I would write about that relationship and it would help people. So that was partly that was the motivation. And I was just already writing, and I just carried on, and there was so much energy behind my writing. I tend to type on the computer quicker than I can read. So I'd type away, and I'd have these experiences. I'd go out with her for a day, and all these things would happen. I would get home at night, and before I went to bed, flipped open the computer, typed about 1,000 words, just banged it all out, went to bed, woke up the next morning, and then edited it, and that was really one of the motivations. And I just felt if I can write a book that helps people, then that's really meaningful, that gives my life sort of quite a lot of purpose. And then now that I've written the book and more it's sort of morphed into what it is in the current day, I realize that it's a story. It's like a cautionary tale. This is what happens if you don't love yourself. This is the kind of toxicity. This is the kind of dysfunctional relationship you can get into. And yet there's hope, because if you apply love and forgiveness, you can come out the other side. So there's a message in there of hope. But there's also, for me, what's most important for me, the mission of this book, is that if there's somebody out there who's suffering, who's in a very dark place, and they're in a dysfunctional relationship of some way, shape, or form, and they're in denial, and they don't understand why their life is so miserable, and somehow they get hold of my book and they read my book and they say, this delusion, this self-sabotage, this I am convincing myself to stay in this relationship because I believe I'm going to help my partner. This is exactly what happened to this woman. And if my book motivates that person in a dysfunctional relationship to recognize that they have the problem is internal, they have an internal disconnect, and the problem is not external. When they realize, if they realize that through reading my book and then take steps to solve that, then I will be thrilled. That would be a triumph. That means that my book has a real purpose, and it, in many ways, it gives all the suffering that I went through, meaning. And reminds me of a story that I read, which is, it's quite interesting. So many people go through so much torturous suffering. And here's the thing I heard from some Syrian refugees, and it's very powerful. And I'm very blessed. If my suffering can give help, then all of the suffering I went through it's effortless, because it's helping people. If you can give your suffering meaning, it's wonderful. It's bliss. These Syrian refugees, they were tortured, they were battered, they were abused, they were separated from their families, all for the cause of the rebellion. And they all said, if we had made it, if we had overturned the regime and brought about a new republic, all of our suffering would be for a greater purpose. So it doesn't matter. But because we didn't achieve our goal, the suffering feels terrible. And I just thought, well, how wonderful for anybody if they go through suffering, if they can find meaning and purpose out of their suffering. So I feel very blessed in that regard. And if my book goes on to help people, properly help people move forward in their spiritual journey, in their life, in their self-acceptance and self-love and self-development, then it'll be really wonderful for me. So that's sort of the mission of my book, if you will.
Yes, it's a beautiful mission. I feel that your journey was a positive experience, despite the fact that there were bumps here and there, because you're growing within yourself a sense of understanding and acceptance of what happened to you, to your circumstances, sense of surrendering to what is and what cannot be changed. When you talk about how you dreamt of being able to change your Tomo, help, and then you realize that you can only help yourself, and as a result of that, you started to maybe turn your lenses onto yourself, and you connect with that source of self-love and learn lessons about yourself and extract meaning from that pain. It's a positive story. I would imagine that you suffered a lot and it's been hard for you, but to have the openness and the kindness and the generosity to share the message with all of us, just hoping that one person might receive the message when it's hard for them, in the same way you received the message about Tokyo on the beach, or the message
Yeah.
From the person having an interview on the TV talking about self-empowerment, really. I think it's worthwhile. And I want to thank you so much for doing it and allowing your voice to be heard, allowing your lessons to be shared. I wish we could talk more. I still had a good number of questions, very important, very relevant, but we're going to have to close soon. Towards the end, Elizabeth, what are your best 3 teachings for everyone, but maybe for people that are into the BDSM world or struggle with their sexuality, and generally everyone that would listen and watch this? What are your best 3 teachings to live a happy and fulfilling life?
Well, without a doubt, number one is to learn to love yourself and be at one with yourself. Be absolutely who you are. Don't let anybody tell you what you aren't. And for many people, it's hard because your barriers are already up through life experience and through what people have gaslighted you to believe. But it's the most important thing. Learning, seek yourself and learn to love yourself. And then all these other things will flow. That's the sort of first thing. And like I said at the beginning, I'm not 100% there either. So we do have to do other things to keep happy. I think the other 2 points I'd make is one, as much as possible, live your life with a heart of gratitude. And if you're not accustomed to doing that, then practice living your life moment to moment with a heart of gratitude. Be grateful we can communicate through this medium. Grateful that I was able to walk home today. Grateful that I have a day job. Grateful that the sun was shining. Just every day until it becomes a habit. And then I also think the third thing I would say is being in the moment. Now, I'm really bad at this. I'm always thinking about X, talking about Y, looking at Z. If you're in the moment, really properly in the moment, nothing else matters. And to get into the moment, for me, I've been there on occasions. It takes quite a lot of discipline for me to get into the moment. Typically, I would have to be meditating on a regular basis, which I do sometimes, not enough, but I do sometimes. Today, I was a little bit in the moment at my yoga class. I do Bikram yoga, which is the hot yoga. And I often get into the moment then. But it's always fleeting for me. I'd like to be in the moment consistently. The 2 times, or 1 time in particular, I remember I was in the moment was when I actually did a raw foods diet for 10 days. I was doing some yoga breathing exercises. This was when I was living in Dubai. It was an Indian guru who had this program. And I was so in the moment by the time I gave up coffee, which was quite hard for me, just for those 10 days. For me to be properly in the moment, a lot of the time it's to do with my diet and what I'm eating and what I'm doing and exercise. So those are my 3. Learn to love yourself, live your life with a heart of gratitude, and try as much as possible to be in the moment and take whatever measures or activities you need to do to get into the moment and be in the moment, and nothing else matters.
They are beautiful, Elizabeth, absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Absolutely universal. Love yourself, embrace gratitude, and be present in the here and now. I think if we can only remember to connect with these truths within us once a day, and our lives would be a little bit more enlightened and happier. Thank you so much for your time, for your openness, for sharing yourself with us, for your authenticity, for your wisdom, for writing the book EXODAI. Maybe you can show it again, and maybe tell our watchers and listeners.
Can you see that okay? Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
It's available on Amazon exclusively.
Yes.
So I'm sorry if you're not an Amazon fan, but that's the only way to get it.
Everyone is an Amazon.
Unless I send it to you directly. So Amazon, and it's all in all the Amazon markets, main markets, including India,
Yes.
and Mexico, as well as the obvious markets. And if you type in EXODAI Hendrick, it should show up. It doesn't come up very much on search because I haven't sold 1 million copies yet. Not
Yes.
quite a long way off. I'm about 999,900 away from that. Anyway, it's on Amazon, but you can also go to my website, which is just a landing page telling you a bit about the book, and there's a big orange button that sends you straight to the Amazon page. And my website is www.exodai.co.uk. So www.exodai.co.uk. Incidentally, the meaning of the word exodai is revealed in the book. It's a beautiful story. So do go check it out. I must tell you that there are trigger warnings in the book. It deals with suicide. It deals with real life sadistic BDSM torture, and it's not for the faint-hearted. So go in with an open mind and just maybe read some of the reviews before you jump in as well.
Thank you so much for sharing where people can find out a bit more about you and where they can order the book, and letting them know about the information that they may want to know before starting reading it. I'm going to order it myself and start reading it soon. I'm very excited to really learn more about your story. Thank you for everything, Elizabeth. It's been fantastic to be here in this space with you. I wish we could talk a bit more, but maybe we'll do it again. All the best. Many thanks from me and all of the others that will benefit from this. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nicoletta. This has been really wonderful, and you've asked some great questions, and I feel very honored to be on your show. So thank you so much.
Thank you.